to welcome you to the Relationship Support Network's Couples Webinar. I'm Dr. John Slate, and a thought I wanted to present is when we change the roots of our identity, we change every relationship in our life. And today, our topic is going to be, why do my emotions take over? Why do our emotions sometimes take over in our life? Either one of y'all have a idea?
I think just because that's what comes up the fastest is your emotions, and not like your ability to stop and think about it before you respond.
Yeah, and I would
Go ahead.
say, I would just say that, yeah, that's sort of the default mode. There's, people that have developed ways of pausing or controlling or putting on the brake, like the samurai or whatever, but that's a very specific, like, go and meditate in a monastery and put a lot of work into it. I don't think it's the default. And because it's not the default, I don't think people have a lot of role models growing up. What you see is people just sort of being carried along by the tides of their limbic system, mostly.
Right. You're right. Both of you are exactly right. So here's an example. He's a former client. This is not his name. It's David. And when we think of anger, what really happened in this scenario is to be honest, his wife dropped a coffee mug, and David came unglued because in his past, mistakes meant that you were unsafe. And the message that was underneath the anchor is protection and respect and self-worth. And so a simple coffee mug was more than a coffee mug. This is what happens to us a lot in life. There's messages underneath there. The same thing with anxiety, but it's often different. The message that anxiety has is often uncertainty or safety. And so underneath our reactions, sometimes we try to control. We think the answer is to control our anger and our anxiety, and that will fix everything if I can just control. But sometimes these emotional outbreaks that take over are totally irrational. A coffee cup dropping and somebody getting irate, because it just means a loss of control. And so this is trying tonight. I would like to understand emotions. I'm not going to be talking about coping measures tonight, about emotions. Instead, it's what's underneath the anger and the anxiety. Under anger tends to be when I feel threatened, disrespected, controlled, unfair, deeply hurt. As you know, anger is often that secondary feeling when I feel threatened, when I feel disrespected. And so if instead of waiting till the anger shows up to try to then control it, can we control the messages that we're receiving first? Is the thesis I want to kind of explore, because often they're based on fear or rejection, disappointment, embarrassment, grief, or shame. These type feelings, if I were to call um, right now, Scott, I know you can't see James, and all I'm just going to say is he's got a beard. So if I were to look at James and call him a pretty woman, he would just laugh because he does have a beard, and it would be kind of stupid on me to do that. But if we were to make a remark about some person that was closer to home in one of these areas, then we might see anger. And so anger is really an armor that protects against vulnerability. And anger, the whole purpose is it prepares you to fight. And so hold that thought right there. It protects vulnerability and it prepares to fight. And so maybe yesterday in your past, that protection could have been important. But today, that same anger causes interference because hopefully in your relationship is safe. And that's something that, we've been trying to work on, or we've talked about, Scott. We've talked about maybe in other relationship, you might not have felt safe, and there was more protection things going on at that time. Hang on, I've got a problem. Let me go check and see if we're on fire here. Hang on.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to have to. Is that bothering y'all?
I don't hear anything.
I hear it. It's very faint on the feed, but it is there.
Okay, it's just stopped. It's
Okay.
just stopped. I guess my wife found the cutoff or something. There's nothing going on. Anyway,
All right.
Interference. And so what happens when we feel like we need to protect? Just as y'all both mentioned, we react, we defend, whether it's with family, friends, or work, and we attach meanings to actions. So you could be having a conversation with your favorite person in the world, your best friend, maybe your partner. You could be having a conversation and a look could trigger, and you attach a meaning to that trigger. And it might have been like the illustration we talked about with David. It could just be a drop in the glass. We attach meanings to it based on, and that could be childhood experiences, previous relationships, failures, fears. We draw conclusions about who I am, and we accept them as facts, and we don't challenge them. We accept these conclusions that we've come to about ourselves as facts. When at the time, it might not be a fact, and it especially might not be a fact now. And so the first step is kind of noticing when emotions show up more in your life, anger or anxiety. I've kind of brought up the difference in the two of them and there is a difference. And the question next time that anger or anxiety shows up in your life is, what is that emotion protecting? Especially if it's an event that was a small event, dropping a glass, you know. Remember, you know, when your reaction is larger than the event, you might really think about, what is that emotion protecting? Or what meaning did you attach to that situation? What could your emotion be protecting? Awareness is the first step because it interrupts. A reaction is just that. It's automatic. It doesn't process through your frontal lobes. It processes through the limbic system, what little gray matter is there. Awareness interrupts, and awareness causes us to move to our thinking mind out of our emotional mind. And so when you're aware, when y'all two think of it, that would be little questions. I think about some of these situations. You know, maybe you can think about situations that might have happened to you kind of recently that had that kind of an overreaction to you. You know, notice what's happening in your body before you react. I have a client who had anxiety attacks every day when we first started. And what she noticed first is she got hot. And what I used to call, Scott, you might remember the word a boo-boo bag. And that was kind of like an ice bag that was wrapped in cloth, and you'd put it on boo-boos. And so putting that boo-boo bag on her neck and chest, and she bought one of these Dyson fans, caused her to not go into anxiety attacks. Changing the temperature, that's probably hip. You know, if you think of DBT type therapy, James, you know, that would be temperature adjustment. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that it's for her. I mean, because Miyamoto Musashi would do the breathing exercises probably, and he would name it. He'd get the awareness. He would say, "I feel anger," rather than "I am angry." But it's interesting that an ice bag is also a viable intervention. That's fascinating, actually.
Well, it's a DBT concept, and it's called it's under self-soothing. And so it really is. That's why if you I went to Norway 2 years ago and saw a woman, this was probably in April in Norway, and she dove into the Baltic Sea.
Wow.
And, you know, that's kind of a common thing with the Norwegians, is they call that an emotional reset. It's the temperature. And so, like I said, for her, what happened to her body was she got hot. I mean, hot. And she said how she wanted to strip. And that's not good. And so, you know, do you start rehearsing before you know what to say? I'm not getting that out good. Do you begin rehearsing what to say before you gather all the facts? You might think about that for you. Am I assuming I know what you're getting ready to say, and so I've already got the words in my mouth? What do you tell yourself about your life when you start to get emotionally triggered? Is it kind of things like they're going to perceive me different? Or is it I'm going to be vulnerable? What am I expecting to happen if I do not react? There's clues about our protective measures, and awareness of it is it's an important first step to interrupt the patterns. So awareness can be transferred to curiosity. I've used this word in prior webinars before in groups. Curiosity, again, is a shift from out of the limbic system into your cognitive resources. Curiosity might cause you to wonder what happened just before the anxiety or for the anger. It might cause you to ask yourself, what's happening to me right now? And what I do want to do is I do want to go over this system that I'm going to present of recovery. And I'm going to, just like I normally do, is send the notes right after the session on everything that I've said. Anger. Go ahead.
So yeah, one slide back on curiosity. It was a thought that I had, especially because you mentioned fear and pain and stuff, and you said anger could be secondary to it. To what extent is it like we've got something leading to anger versus some sort of a distortion? I can think of two. One, a lot of people talk about men feel that anger is the only emotion they're socially allowed to express. And on the other side of the coin for that dynamic, I think a lot of people misread male emotions as anger, even if they're not. And there may be certain things that are part of that. My wife actually did a study when she's a doctor, she was in residency, and she did a study on medical residents to figure out what sleep deprivation did to them.
Okay.
And one of them was, there was motor skills for like knot tying. There was knowledge recall. To see, do you recall like doctoring, just can you dump the facts like you used to in med school? There was emotional awareness and emotional facial recognition, and then like cultural sensitivity. I think cultural sensitivity went out the window first with the sleep deprivation. And I think facial recognition.
No, it was ethical decision making, not cultural sensitivity.
Oh, ethical decision making. Yes, ethical decision making went first with sleep deprivation. And then
two was the ability to recognize facial, like emotions based on faces.
So all the emotions got collapsed down into what? It was happy or
mad.
Happy or angry was, and that was it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you weren't looking happy, you got read, which in a hospital frequently you're not. People, these emotions were getting misread by the sleep deprived residents as anger. So, and I mean, like, medical residents are a special case of extreme sleep deprivation, but you can go on YouTube and find 6 guys saying Americans are routinely sleep deprived. And I'm wondering, to what extent is anger misread here for various reasons? And when we do this curiosity, should we be drilling into what's really, like, is it something other than anger?
I think that's good, because just like it's hard to tell as a clinician, it's hard to tell when people have trauma, ADHD, or anxiety. Sometimes, a lot of times, I key in on key words that are said to people. I had 2 nights ago, I have a client that I started with that she said she had anxiety issues. And so it's hard to know what had really happened. And she's taken all the meds and, for years, and none of them worked. And then she talked about being raped in college. And so then you realize it was trauma.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That is, wow.
And so nobody had picked that up in therapy for the years that it was PTSD, and they hadn't diagnosed her for that. And so
Yeah,
it's
maybe
kind
that
of
had a
hard
little something to do with it. Sure.
yeah, it is hard telling what is going on with us. You're exactly right, James. And so curiosity gets to that. She hadn't put it together either because she thought she was originally diagnosed with ADHD things because she couldn't focus in school. And it might be a little of both, who knows? But the bottom line was it's hard to tell without curiosity what is really happening in our lives. And so, good question, good statement. And so, this is kind of the anger recovery system. I'm not presenting a coping skill, it's a system of skills. And so, we have to examine the story that we're telling ourselves because often we assume, and I'm not going into that word, but sometimes there's a bad definition of that word. And so if you know what I'm talking about, good. If you don't, it doesn't matter. But if we assume, we don't get to the truth. So taking a 5-second, that's all I'm saying, a 5-second pause, but instead of trying to look at it as trying to control my anger, I'm suggesting, what is my anger trying to protect? And a lot of times, our actions, our feelings are trying to protect something else, whether it's fears, shames, insecurities, and noticing things that are happening. Am I trying to physical things happening? Is my voice changing? Is my tone changing? Am I becoming defensive? Very important. Am I trying to win an argument with my best friend? That's an illogical thing. And I'm just getting you to look at warning signals that you might have and choose one small action to take. Very simple here. What we tend to do when emotions happen, Scott, we talked about this last time. We tend to shut down. We tend to escape through many different things that we do. You know, maybe it could be avoidance. Maybe it could be anger. Maybe it could be I think I know where you're going, and so I assume, and we get down a rabbit hole and we spiral. I'm suggesting focusing on the facts. Don't future trip. That's called anxiety. Take several slow, deep breaths, James, kind of what you were talking with the Bushido thing. I'm really using another word, probably keeping it more in dialectical behavior therapy of diaphragmatic breathing, that deep breathing, a deep breath, more fully exhaling everything out of your lungs, and try to name what is happening. I'm beginning to feel anxiety. What am I noticing? And this is about the anxiety recovery system, is really trying to take an action other than what you normally do. Take an action, maybe it's the opposite even of what you're feeling, and focus on the facts and name it to claim it, because you are not your feelings. You are more than your feelings. You're not an anxious person. You might have anxiety issues. You're not a person that's, you're not your emotions. You are more than that. And I use this term that to me makes sense. And it's called updating your identity. Just like you think of updating your computer, if we live in the past, then we're going to use those survival skills where we don't need survival. We're going to react where our partner might need safety. So updating our identity, what is generally taught by psychologists is coping skills. You ever think if we updated our identity, we wouldn't need the coping skills? You ever thought about that? I mentioned, Wendy, I don't know if you were around. I mentioned if you saw James, and if I were to call him a woman with that beard, I mean, that wouldn't be very applicable. It wouldn't hurt his feelings. He'd probably just laugh and say, "Can you hear my voice?" And so updating your identity, we take this David guy that we talked about yet first. He thought he couldn't manage his anger. And for him, it was a protection. It was a survival skill. But perhaps he wouldn't need that anger as a survival skill if he updated his identity and became the person that he needed to step out of that comfort zone. There's advantages in being safe in our cocoons and risking that growth zone. The risk is you might feel that rejection that we talked about earlier. You might feel that failure. You might feel that hurt, that core hurt that you have in your life when you step out of your comfort zone because you update your identity. But mistakes are really learning opportunities, and especially I'm a very hard-headed man. I have to learn. Seems like that's how I learn, is by making mistakes. And so look at them as some risk that you're taking to step out of our cocoons, our safe areas, and become someone that you want to become.
I have a question.
Go ahead, James.
Okay, so mistakes are learning opportunities. Absolutely good. I heard Joe Rogan once say, if you want to get good at something, you need to double your rate of failure.
There you go.
I think it's probably onto something that makes sense. What do you do if you're working with somebody like a student or your child, and they are resisting embarking on a learning curve because they, I think, sense that going through the learning curve will be embarrassing, painful, frustrating, because that's what learning curves are. How do you get them to have the confidence to realize that they are strong enough to handle the rigors of this learning curve and that it'll be better in the long run?
Good words, James. And so sometimes with kids, it takes to stick your toes in the water. We have a big lake here in Middle Tennessee called Oakry Lake. You don't jump out in the middle of the lake. You stick your toes in the water. And sometimes it takes coaching and experimentation with kids because they haven't been through the learning opportunities that you've been through. Sometimes they do need their hand to be held. You probably know people that have taught their kids to swim by throwing them out in the middle of the lake. I think that's called trauma.
Right.
And so maybe that's when Wendy sees them to do brain surgery on the parent, maybe that's possible, so the question is probably leading your kid instead of pushing your kid with, who do you want to become? Who do you want to be? What do you want your life to look at? And helping them to take some steps into that would be important. And so my challenge is I'm not here to teach some good ideas. What I'm here to do is to challenge you to do one thing differently this week in your life. By this guideline, who do you want to become? Choose one thing to do differently. Next week, we're going to discover why certain situations affect us more than most people. Isn't it interesting that two people can watch the same thing and one person could be traumatized and the other person says, cool, you know, why our emotions aren't the real problem. What are y'all thinking the real problem could be? That my emotions are different than your emotions.
With me, it's my emotions are usually the problem because I'll jump to anger to protect me from being sad, or something can happen and it'll make me anxious. That's the hard thing for me, is stopping long enough to control my emotions before they just burst out of my mouth. And then I have to apologize a few minutes later because I feel like a total jerk, you know. But I'm learning, and I've had some good war stories this week. So
Good.
it just takes time, you know.
It does, Scott, but possibly why that happens is because I know your past. I know what has happened to you in your past. And so a lot of times the emotions aren't the problem. It's your interpretation of the event that's happening. Whether that's someone's challenging your intelligence, your kindness, your whatever. When we feel threatened, that's when we react. There's an assortment of things that we can do, but they're our defense. They're our protection strategies. Emotions exist for a reason. We aren't to cut out emotions. We can change the interpretations. Just like we heard just a few minutes ago, we heard a fire alarm going off. We can't just say, I'm going to ignore that, what I just heard. That's not smart. And emotions are there for a reason. They're a first response to things. Emotion, isn't it interesting? The difference in the word danger and the word anger is only that one letter. I don't know from a linguist, of course, I'm just talking about English here, but I think that's what that anger is when we feel threatened, we defend, our system thinks danger and it reacts. And that's why it takes so long, Scott, for this anger to come down. It's not your anger, it's your defense. It's kind of like after this alarm just went off a few minutes ago, I'm still a little sensitive. I'm kind of really wondering, was my wife cooking something, or what really happened? You know, you stay alert, you stay hyper vigilant. It's the PTSD word. You stay hyper vigilant because of the danger. That's why your anger takes a little bit to come down, Scott. Whereas if you really weren't sitting in danger, if you were to be curious and ask questions instead, if you can just have that 5 to 10 seconds to move from your emotional mind to your cognitive mind with curiosity, not smart aleck questions, I heard what you said, but can you go into it a little bit more? I'm sure you got a significant point. That curiosity allows your partner to not feel threatened, and so they let their walls down. When our walls are up, there's a purpose that walls serve, and that's to protect.
Hey, John.
Yep.
Tell me that this is kosher, but I could tell Scott some stuff that like helped me with that type of a struggle.
Cool.
So yeah, like if you're trying to control your emotions, part of the problem is that, trying to do things by willpower frequently fails because we get tired. We have a beer. We have too many damn things on a Monday. And we run out of willpower, gets exhausted. I think it's measurable. It's called ego depletion in the literature, I think. And so instead of just trying to willpower to not do something, the samurai stuff that I stumbled across in my 20s, it's basically the idea is that instead of trying to not do something, you try to do something intentionally, which is the breathing. And I mean, sure, what kind of breathing you do, that's going to be open to interpretation. But the point is that breathing is an involuntary action, like your emotions, that you can readily take voluntary control over. And so when you're getting worked up, if you say, all right, I'm going to breathe, and you have a way that you breathe or a physical interrupt, that might be a thing that gets you that like 5 seconds that then allows you to ask the questions. It's something that helped me, at least. I don't know. Your mileage may vary, but yeah.
Yep. We've talked about that, and I would be interested in knowing more about that concept, because the diaphragmatic breathing actually affects the vagus nerve there, Wendy. And of course, that affects your parasympathetic system, and it actually literally helps you to calm. And that's probably what James is talking about, is probably the same concept, I would guess. If you were to really look at it, I don't know.
Yeah, the one that I know of is that when you breathe out, so my understanding is we don't actually know what exactly Musashi was doing, but it was probably, there's some reasonable guesses. When we throw some modern medicine analysis onto it, the breathing out is the stuff that activates the parasympathetic, and the breathing in activates your sympathetic. So what you do is you breathe in like at a normal speed, but then you breathe out for longer than you're breathing in. And when you do that, and I've taught my little boy to do this. He's like 6'7". He's learning, about feelings and stuff. And so we talk about samurai breathing, and he knows that it's the point is that and I have to remind him, of course, because he's a kid. But the point is that if you lengthen your exhale more than your inhale, you're forcing your body into a more parasympathetic state, and you're putting the brakes on so you can get your cognition in track and figure out, all right, am I angry? Am I scared? What's this? Is this about what's happening right now, or is this about something that happened 10 years ago? And that's been helpful for me with the brakes.
Good. And that is what you do in diaphragmatic breathing too.
Okay, cool. We might be talking about the same stuff by a different name.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, glad you brought those insights in, James. I appreciated having y'all here tonight. And today's session was about, why do my emotions take over? I'm going to be emailing the notes and the worksheet after this group meeting. And if you found this to be helpful, or if you're watching this on YouTube, good. You can join us at the Relationship Support Network.com for more information, articles, videos, post. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.